I've been on – look, this isn't a hot take. Lou Anarumo, when you look at the season that the Cincinnati Bengals just had, underachieving, missing the playoffs for back-to-back seasons, whether Burrow played last year or not, you could still look at last year and question the defense, at points throughout the season and even this season, obviously. I don't think that's really up for debate. Let's not act like Joe Burrow playing last year would have eliminated some of the question marks that people had about the defense at times. But the defense got really bad this year. It's not a hot take for anyone to have said the Bengals need to move on from Lou Anarumo, and that's exactly what they did. It wasn't a surprise to anybody. Some felt maybe down the stretch that the Bengals had maybe done enough, again, winning 5 straight and looking improved defensively, that maybe they go ahead and keep Lou Anarumo. Obviously, that wasn't the case. But reports started circulating yesterday that the Bengals, in their ongoing search for their new defensive coordinator, that they have narrowed it down to 2 names. Al Golden, defensive coordinator for Notre Dame, as we've talked about. The Fighting Irish will be in action on Monday night, the national championship game against Ohio State. That's why one of our buyer sells yesterday, before the show got off the rails a little bit, one of the buyer sells was that Al Golden will be named the defensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals coming up on Tuesday, because that's basically what we feel like they're waiting for, is that title game to get wrapped up. But another name that's listed as a finalist, of course, is Patrick Graham, of the Raiders. We had Jason Fitz on earlier in the week, and we asked him his thoughts on, what's his takeaway about Graham, and he said, run to him. I mean, wrap your arms around him. He's the guy that you want to be your defensive coordinator. He talked about his scheme and how it's a very complex scheme. It's going to take some time. Jacob was kind of laughing, saying, well, that sounds a lot like Anarumo at this point. But the bottom line is, you moved on from Anarumo to help improve this defense. And the question I have is, and I'm not really down on these names or high on these names either, but if you look at the name Al Golden, you look at the name Patrick Graham, if those truly are the finalists for the defensive coordinator hire in Cincinnati, are you accomplishing that? If the goal to move on from Lou Anarumo, who is being highly sought after by so many other teams in football right now, I'm curious. He seems to be a bigger name in the defensive coordinator front for other teams than the 2 names we're talking about right here. The goal was to improve the defense, moving on from Lou Anarumo. Are these 2 names better than Lou Anarumo? Do these 2 names make you feel like the Bengals can accomplish that feat, if that's the case, if one of these 2 names are officially hired?
Yeah, I think Casey and Jacob both put out this point. They if either hire seems like a pretty good hire. Like Patrick Graham, he spent over a decade with the greatest defensive mind that the NFL football has ever seen. Bill Belichick spent over a decade over in New England. He spent some time with Brian Flores. He spent some time in a lot of places with some guys who know ball, who know how to coach a defense. So I'm cool with that. Al Golden has done a fantastic job. I do want to just point out, and I see people do this all the time. Lou Anarumo's getting interviews elsewhere, and all of a sudden you'll see Bengals fans go like, "Oh, people want him. We made a mistake. We made a mistake. Everyone wants him. Everyone wants Lou." You cannot operate in the way of doing that. You cannot say like, "Hey, I'm going to fire you. God, please don't get hired. Please don't get hired because then we'll look bad. Please don't get hired." You can't do that. Like I tell people this all the time in relationships. When you break up with your girlfriend, you got to understand that at some point she's going to get a new boyfriend. She's not just going to be single for the rest of her life. And you can't if you're going to fire a coach, you've got to understand someone else might want him. He might get hired somewhere else, and you've got to be okay with that. Lou Anarumo, in his 6 years as the defensive coordinator of the Cincinnati Bengals, had a top half of the league, 16th or better, defense and scoring 1 time, 1 out of 6. And if you want to make that parameter be failing, you're not better than half of the league. That seems like even a low bar. You got to be better than half the league to not fail. He failed 5 out of 6 times, and yes, he was really good in both defensive. The defense was very good in both playoff runs, and that certainly means something. For about a 20 to 25 game stretch, the defense looked really good. The rest of the time, it looked completely inept. I'm not worried about Lou Anarumo signing anywhere else. I'm very, very excited about either Patrick Graham or Al Golden.
I think that, too, and we've all known this, but turnovers saved Lou Anarumo. I mean, yeah, it's you get credit for forcing turnovers, but a lot of the times, those are unforced errors. Those are mistakes that the other team's giving you. So hiding all of his deficiencies in those turnovers wasn't the recipe for success. I don't think he was a very good defensive coordinator. I think he was fine. And that honest to God, that's all you really have to be with the Bengals and that offense. You just got to be fine. You got to have a defense that's okay. Last year they were terrible. They were so bad it hurts. And it took them out of games, and it lost them the season. That's why the Bengals aren't playing right now today, because of Lou Anarumo's defense. Yep. When you're the defensive coordinator, you're the face of that. I'm excited for a new change. And to answer your question, do I think those two guys could change the way this defense is? Yeah, I do. The Bengals defense has been running the same way for 6 years now, as Reed said. I think a little bit of change in any way, shape, or form could lead to improvement. And I think that's part of the reason, too, why, teams move on from coaches. It's not working that way, right? And we know it's not. So if we go this way, we don't know what's going to happen, but we know the current way is not working. So we'll move on. I hope Al Golden is the defensive coordinator. I think it would be great. It would be. I don't know if he's going to be able to build, a Notre Dame-style defense with a Bengals budget. We'll see. And I'm hoping that he's going to be able to do it. But I think that no matter who they hire in that role, I think it's going to be an improvement just because change is needed right now for the Bengals.
I will admit that if you ask me who I'd rather have between Al Golden and Patrick Graham, I'm heavily leaning towards Patrick Graham because of a couple reasons. One, the one that I already said, he spent a decade plus under Bill Belichick learning defense. And you could say what you want about Bill Belichick's coaching tree. I think it's much better than people give it credit for. I know that everyone just kept hiring them and it didn't work out sometimes. But when you spend over a decade with a great defensive mind, when you spend a couple years with Brian Flores, who's another great defensive mind, and like all these guys that know defense, I like it. And on top of that, he's called a defense. He's been a defensive coordinator at the National Football League. In the National Football League, that is the one caveat behind Al Golden is he's never done that. Right, he's been a head coach for a bunch of different colleges. He's been a linebacker coach here in Detroit and Cincinnati, but he's only ever been the DC for Notre Dame this past year. And it just so happens that Notre Dame has a really, really capable head coach who was a really, really capable defensive coordinator above him. But to his credit also, if you learn under Marcus Freeman, that seems to be a pretty good recipe too, because he obviously knows defense as well.
Yeah, I mean, all of those same points, I would reiterate them, emphasize them again, Reed. I'm happy with either hire. I probably lean more towards Patrick Graham, mainly because, the tutelage that he had under Bill Belichick and other head coaches like Brian Flores. Yeah. That's another really big defensive coordinator name that he's had time under to study.
Mike McCarthy, which is another good coach. He's an offensive guy, but that's another guy.
He's got a lot of great mentors there. And then you look at the team that he had last season, and I know the numbers aren't great, but he was basically like average to barely below average in most metrics, and he's running out guys like Zach Carter and making them look good, who, by the way, we cut like in week 3, and he's running that guy out there and making him look serviceable. So that's the type of guy that we're dealing with here. He's a guy that is known to be really, really likable, relatable to the younger players, able to get the most out of those guys. I mean, he was without Max Crosby for at least, 6-7 games here, and he was still putting up some solid numbers. And on top of that, the Raiders' offense, non-existent. They don't have a quarterback to save their life. They don't have an offensive line to save their life. So he's also working against the other half of his team too. So, and then you just look at the body of work, what he's been able to do against Mahomes, what he's been able to do against Lamar this earlier on in the season. I like it. I like it a lot. Al Golden, I like him because he already knows how we operate. His defense ran exactly how the Bengals did things already. So it's not like you're changing a whole bunch of things. There's already some familiarity there. But you get the added bonus of he's working with young guys right now. He's able to develop young guys, which is a skill set that Lou Anarumo did not have. I think Lou's a good coordinator, to go back to your point, Elliot. I just think he needs prime defensive players to make his scheme work. He needs guys that are in their prime and some stars to make it really shine, because we saw what he could do. He had a top 10 defense in Cincinnati at one point. But, and to reiterate the earlier on point, that doesn't make me afraid of letting him walk, because I don't think he was a good fit here. We have a whole new defensive look, a bunch of young guys, and veterans that are past their prime. That's what we have right now. We need to reinvigorate, get it juiced up with some young, fresh, prime talent, and go from there. And I think either way that you slice it, both guys can do that.
And you can't get worried about Lou Anarumo getting another job. Like you just can't. It's the same thing I tell Bengals fans when we let a player walk, right? Like last year. Now I've changed my opinion on T. Higgins, but last year I would say, hey, I don't think it makes sense to keep T. Higgins around here. And he might go on and have 12 touchdowns and 1,200 yards. It doesn't mean that it was the wrong move just because he succeeded somewhere else, right? Sometimes it just doesn't make sense. And I'll keep doing the girlfriend analogy. Sometimes, she's got a great career and she's fun and personable, but you don't have the same interests, so it didn't work between you two, but she's still a catch to somebody else. Like it doesn't always have to be like, well, why did other people want Lou Anarumo, right? You just got to be okay with the decision to let him walk.
Yeah. It's like she moves on to somebody else. You're like, well, her breath stinks. Like, why would he be with her? Her breath stinks.
Right.
Well, maybe she popped in a few mints this time. I don't know. I don't know what you want me to say.